Hello everyone, my name is Dusk and welcome to another episode of Shokz video guide. In this guide, Shokz will be playing against EG.DeMusliM. He's currently a rank 5 Terran Grandmaster player with 941 points, 189 wins, and 53 losses. I think before, about a week ago, he was rank 1 Grandmaster, so he's a very, very good Terran player. Alright guys, Shokz will be spawning as the blue Terran in the top position. His opponent is EG.DeMusliM, spawning as the red Terran in the bottom position, and the map is Cloud Kingdom. And now, Terran vs. Terran Cloud Kingdom is very, very dependent on who has these Zelnak towers and whose siege tanks are sieged up on the high ground. So in addition to having a good economy, having a good army, and having good technology and upgrades, position is also one of the more important factors in a Terran vs. Terran. So we're going to see that basically the philosophy of Terran vs. Terran openers is you do something funky or you do something standard and you just try to get ahead with that, and ultimately you're going to get a composition of marine tanks and medevacs. If the game lasts longer, there may be a Raven or battlecruiser switch, but usually it doesn't go that long just because it's a somewhat volatile matchup. But yeah, the siege tanks, it does make it a little hard, and then having the possibility for drops makes it a little bit more frantic. And also in Terran vs. Terran, a player could go mech, which is Hellion tank compared to marine tank, but it's more common to see marine tank just because marines are a little bit more versatile. And so the opener Shokz is going to do is going to be a very Banshee-centric Terran 1-on-1 opener, and I did do a guide about this, so feel free to check that out. But basically we're going to get out an extremely fast Banshee, and then we're going to expand and get the standard composition after that. And so the extremely fast Banshee, it gives us a few things. First of all, we're going to go into the opponent's base, see what they have, we're going to kill a few workers, and then we're going to see what their tech is, what their production is. We're basically just going to see everything. And so I like the opener. The only problem with it is that it's extremely weak to any early game cheeses, and I know that some Terrans do like to do it, but generally at higher levels of play, most Terrans just like to do the common macro game. And so the build order is going to be 10 depot, 11 gas, 12 racks, factory immediately after barracks is done, and then starport immediately after factory is done. And then depending on if Shokz wants to get a really fast Banshee, he could get a tech lab on the factory and swap it with the starport. So the build that DeMusliM is doing is it's a fairly standard opener as well. He's going to get his barracks at 12, probably get his, I think that gas was, I think it was a later gas, I think it was like 14 or 15. Anyway though, he's gonna, what this allows him to do is get his factory up slightly faster while still getting an expansion. And so it's just one of those more hybrid builds that I'm not too familiar with. I know that Shokz and I mostly do 1-on-1 openers and then expand immediately after you get out that Banshee. I really like that build a lot. Anyway, obviously Marines here. Shokz could stand to move the Marine to low ground, doesn't matter too much at this point. If he did, he might get it caught by these two Marines. That's why some players don't like to, some players do. But the advantage of moving your Marine onto the low ground, obviously, is to prevent scouting, and so they don't know if Shokz did a 1-rack expand or not. As you can see, Shokz actually made the tech lab with the barracks after making his first Marine, and then he's going to build a starport immediately on it. So at 5 minutes, the starport is going to finish, and he's going to be able to make a Banshee. He's not getting cloak with this build, that's important. If you get cloak, you're going to have to get your second gas. It's going to severely delay your command center, and you're going to need to get a lot of kills with that Banshee in order to make it successful. And so see DeMusliM, right now he's patrolling his Marines on the side. This is just so he hasn't scouted Shokz at all, and in Terran vs. Terran you really can't scout each other too much after the first Marines out, just because, you know, SCV is not really too good against getting past Marines if your opponent micros correctly, which at this level everyone does. And so he's just, you know, countering everything that could be a possibility, and this is Reapers at this point. And then having the control of the Zelnak towers basically just says that, oh, I'm going to see stuff come to the front. If it's Reapers, I'll see it to the side, so I'm covered on all bases. And so the only thing he has to worry about at this point is a straight up frontal assault with Hellions or something, or a Banshee, which Shokz is making right now. And so as you can see, Shokz is a little bit supply locked at this point, but he's just pumping out Marines from his reactored barracks, and you get this reactor after you start your Banshee, so you're not gas locked for the Banshee. And then at this point, Shokz is just moving out. It's really a little bit cut and dry in the beginning. Just a lot of standard Terran openers. It really comes down to how you jockey yourself in the mid game and how your opener affects your opponent. So as you can see, Shokz is only making one Banshee. The factory takes the tech lab back, and right now he's free to start making siege tanks and his standard composition. You don't need a reactor right away on the starport just because you can't afford to produce directly off it. I know I used to make a reactor immediately just because you're obviously going to make medevacs or Vikings, and so why not make the reactor? But you know, sometimes you like to practice some restraint and keep yourself just making the just keep yourself reactor free on the starport for at least a little bit, so you don't have to just spend the 50 gas. It'll help you get a little bit more gas early game. So as you can see, EG.DeMuslim, this Banshee comes in around 7 minutes. It's going to do pretty good damage against EG.DeMuslim's units. Banshees are generally really good against Marines. Before Stim and Combat Shield, they two-shot Marines, and so he's able to get a lot of economic damage in. If you take a look at the Workers tab right now, Shokz is ahead, but he's going to be able to kill more and more Banshees. He's got full scouting information of DeMuslim's production, and he knows exactly what DeMuslim has, his unit composition, and he's able to kill a few Workers. In the meantime, you know, as you can see, he's getting his own Marine tank army. He's free to expand basically at this point, and yeah, it's just a really solid opener that I like. Now, let's go back to the production tab, killing more Workers. And at this point, I would say that Shokz definitely has an advantage. Very nice play from EG.DeMuslim, picking up his Marines so they don't get shot en route and then dropping it on the Banshee. But what's especially important about this build is keeping this Banshee alive. This is just going to make it really, really annoying for the other Terran player. He always has to worry about that, and so he doesn't even know if the Banshee has cloak or not. But a little bit of a mistake by Shokz getting it shot down, but this Viking probably would have killed it anyway. Finally, we see the Marine tank army coming down from Shokz. Shokz taking his expansion, and I would say that he's got a pretty hefty lead. A 10 supply lead this early on in the game is pretty significant. He's adding on additional Raxes, and when you add on additional Raxes, always make sure to get one tech lab on a Rax and a reactor on the other Rax, and then research all your stim and combat upgrades on the on one of the tech labs, just so you're not wasting any tech labs, because you really don't want to make Marauders in this matchup, and so it's really useless to get a tech lab on the barracks if you're not going to use it. As you can see, Shokz is coming up, and because he had such a good advantage that with the Banshee, he's going to apply a little bit of pressure. But the thing is, if Shokz loses this army, he gives away all map control to EG.DeMuslim. EG.DeMuslim is forced to pull away all Workers, and with these Workers, Shokz is definitely going to lose that battle. But right now, Shokz comes back, and Shokz actually spent a little bit too much money in getting these Vikings. It really isn't helping him too much. And at this point, I think Shokz actually loses this battle. Very, very close though. Shokz loses his battle. He essentially loses his map control. There's a little bit of a misstep by Shokz right here, but he loses his map control. He doesn't really have too much rallied at this point, and he lost a Viking there. That was a mistake, but I think Shokz got a little bit too many Vikings for what he needed at this point. I think one Viking would have sufficed. He saw that EG.DeMuslim did not have a tech lab on a starport, so basically he was only going to produce Vikings or medevacs, and you really don't need two Vikings if you don't have siege mode and you're not jockeying for that air control for the siege tank vision. And so Shokz likes to do this push earlier on in the game, where with about 2 siege tanks and whatever Marines he has, and he does it without siege mode. And it's important to do it without siege mode, just because you're gonna get your siege tanks out faster. You don't have to spend your gas on siege mode. Plus, siege tanks without siege tanks on unsiege mode attack they attack pretty fast and so they actually do a significant amount of damage. And what that allows you to do is basically they're good units all around. They do pretty good damage, and so you can go ahead and push with them. You don't necessarily have to wait for siege mode. When you get siege mode, it basically solidifies your position as the attacker, and it becomes a lot more iffy on. It basically gives the opponent a lot more time to react. And so at this point, we see that Shokz is basically jockeying for position. It's especially important at around the 10 to 12 minute mark, assuming moderate harassment has started, that you really want to control the middle of the map, especially on maps like Cloud Kingdom, where there's basically 2 main entrances, and one of them allows you to get your third. That's why we see Shokz moves his Marine right here. And then at this point, he should also be wary of stim drops. And I think EG.DeMuslim is doing the same thing. Yeah, he's researching both upgrades from one of his tech labs, and so that's going to finish at around 12 to 13 minutes. And at that point, Shokz really should be leaving at least a few Marines here, or at least a Viking in this dead space, or a Viking in this dead space, just to make sure that he doesn't get dropped. Because if you're going to go try to defend your third, that Shokz definitely has, and then they go drop your main, it's going to be a really, really far walk back, and it's going to just do a lot of damage, which is why we see Shokz leaving the siege tank here. Now, I would like to see siege tank basically closer away from the edge, just because, you know, when they're going to drop you, they're going to try to drop at the edge, and so putting your siege tank there makes it a little bit more vulnerable. As you can see, EG.DeMuslim starting to drop already, and in Terran vs Terran, it really comes down to, can you multitask better than the Terran player when you get to this Marine medevac siege tank metagame right here. And so you're going to try to drop as much as possible while preserving the preserving your medevacs. And so just be as annoying as possible. Tax your opponent's APM. You know, drop here. You don't have to commit to any of them, and in the meantime, while he's distracted, you could even drop on a siege tanks if his marines are out of position, make the siege tanks kill themselves, or even move your units a little bit closer, and that'll help you get out of position, pick off any stray medevacs that are used there for vision. As you can see, EG.DeMuslim is certainly behind in the supply. There's no question about that. However, he has his double eBay, so he's getting his upgrades a little bit faster than Shokz. Shokz right now only has one eBay. I think he's really, it's kind of a mistake from Shokz. He really needs to capitalize on the fact that he has his economy advantage. The only part that EG.DeMuslim has better than Shokz right now at this point is that DeMuslim has combat shield, and he also has better positioning than Shokz. And what DeMuslim is trying to do at this point is basically pressure as much as possible using these advantages. And so with the combat shield, he's able to engage a lot better with his marines. With this positioning, he's able to just to force Shokz units to be spread a little bit thin in these positions, and he's able to just apply pressure while expanding freely himself. So if you take a look at the income, Shokz is definitely ahead by 9 or so workers, but it really doesn't matter too much at this point, just because the positioning in Terran vs. Terran is what it's all about. I mean, 9 workers when you have 60 isn't that big of a deal. I mean, it matters definitely, but having this position, you know, securing this Xel'Naga tower, basically, it doesn't matter if Shokz has Viking control or not. When you have a Xel'Naga tower and siege tanks next to it, the opponent can just hold it indefinitely, assuming that you don't have a massive force to try and go ahead and break it. That's why we see that Shokz, feeling a little bit strangled, has to go ahead and try to break one of the fronts. And because he left these 2 siege tanks here, it's just really hard for Shokz to come down this front. So the only way to pressure at this point for Shokz is to come down through this gap or this gap, and EG.DeMuslim meanwhile can just go ahead and apply pressure through this side as much as he wants. He basically controls it with that Xel'Naga tower control. Now we see these players aren't really getting any Vikings, and that's because when you have Xel'Naga towers, having air control doesn't matter, and also scans basically replace the need for Vikings. And so we only have Vikings in these weird positions, and this is just to prevent for any scouting or drops that will come from this bottom side. As you can see, it's especially important to leave units preemptively for a drop. You don't want to have to pull back your army, lose an expansion just for one drop. So we see 5 Marines, 1 siege tank, good enough for a drop. And at this side, a little bit undefended, but only 1 Marine. If we take a look at DeMuslim, he's building 3 turrets. Now, why would you want 3 turrets in one area? Well, the point of this is just to make sure that the medevac is killed before even 1 Marine is dropped, and that's especially important. As you can see, all these players are just jockeying or putting up preemptive missile turrets. This is so important. Just Terran vs. Terran drops are just especially crucial. Right now, as you can see, Shokz tried to break through this bottom side, and he was fairly successful. I think Shokz has vision of this top area. Well, we'll see what happens. Right now, Shokz is just moving his units down. I think he wants a position to break it, yet he sees that EG.DeMuslim has a small army in this top area, so what he's going to do is drop Marines there, meanwhile taking Marines from the bottom and sending them up, dropping Marines in the top area. And what Shokz is trying to do right now is just control the middle area. It's so important to control the middle area, but he sieged up his tanks slightly late, and Marine and EG.DeMuslim came up with a massive force right after Shokz had to go and use a lot of his units to try and go break the middle area. So right now, EG.DeMuslim basically has the army advantage, and this is going to make it really hard for Shokz to secure. He really needs a higher siege tank count. Right now, he's just trying to kill EG.DeMuslim's 4th. Shoksz's 4th is almost up, and they're just both adding on 2 Raxes for every expansion they take. But with this high Marine count, and the fact that Shokz, a little bit of a mistake here from Shokz not stimming his Marine, with this high Marine count and medevac count, he's able to just basically plow through everything Shokz has, and Shokz just never was able to get a good foothold in the middle area. Now, because Shokz at that one point tried to, he used a significant amount of units to try to break this contain right here, he wasn't able to defend the backlash from the units coming from this side, and so right now Shokz is just, he's at a massive deficit for units. He was forced to trade unfavorably against EG.DeMuslim, and this is what is basically getting EG.DeMuslim slightly ahead at this point. Right now, EG.DeMuslim is free to attack this top side, as you can see, throwing a scan, and Shokz is completely naked on that side. He has to bring in workers from here, and right now Shokz is basically trying to harass as much workers as he can in whatever area he can. So Shokz has secured this path right down here, but he still doesn't have good control of this area, and because he's got naked siege tanks, EG.DeMuslim is just able to drop siege tanks onto Shoksz's siege tanks, killing them effectively for an extremely cost-effective trade, as you can see right here. those siege tanks are unable to attack. It's kind of like one of those StarCraft master achievements. Meanwhile, Shokz is trying to pressure as much as possible into EG.DeMuslim's third, and Shokz actually committing a few medevacs to this. Losing this medevac, especially to that turret, the only full medevac, was an especially big blow. And having lost 4 medevacs there, that's a massive chunk of Shokz's medevac count. And so he lost all his vision in here, or all his map control in here. EG.DeMuslim still has the map control. I would like to see EG.DeMuslim actually leave 1 Marine here, just so you can see what Shokz is diverting to. And at this point, Shokz's army is severely outnumbered. He really needs to take his 4th, but EG.DeMuslim is going to have none of that. That 4th dies almost immediately. And then at this point, EG.DeMuslim is just capitalizing on the fact that he's got a much greater army. Shokz right now, slightly out of position, so he's just going to go for a base trade. And we're going to speed this up a little bit. Shokz going for his base trade. And it's probably not going to work out too well for him. They're kind of close, but EG.DeMuslim has the better army and the more upgraded units compared to Shokz. And so at this point, nice positioning from EG.DeMuslim. Basically squashes Shokz's counterattack, and EG.DeMuslim takes this game. And so let's go over a little bit about how TVT works out. In the beginning, you want to get your advantage by doing some weird opener and then transitioning into a macro Marine tank style. When you go Marine tanks, it's really hard for your opponent to attack without anything but like a mass buttload of Banshees or something weird. So Marine tank, medevac, the standard solid style that I want you guys to all do, and how you get there safely is by either harassing them or just doing a really safe build. We're going to show you a few Terran vs Terran builds. They're all basically a 1-1-1 variation or a one racks expand, and it just comes down to how your opponent plays and how you play. But anyway, we use that to get advantage early on. With that advantage, we take obviously a fast expansion, and then we're going to try to take a fast third with our Marine tank army. If you feel like your initial harassment did good damage, you should go ahead and push with unsieged tanks. Unsieged tanks are very good against unupgraded Marines, assuming that you have your own Marines in front, and you can just help capitalize on that advantage. Now, one of the mistakes Shokz made this game was trying to pressure too much and losing that initial army. Having lost that initial push with his 2 or 3 unsieged tanks, he gave complete map control to DeMuslim. If Shokz just stayed back and defended, or stayed back and just controlled this Zelnaga tower like DeMuslim did for a long time, just controlled this Zelnaga tower and capitalized on advantage, he probably would have won this game. Now, another thing that Shokz did, another mistake that I think Shokz did, was only getting 1 eBay while EG.DeMuslim getting 2, and that resulted in EG.DeMuslim having 2 Marines on the way to 3-3, while Shokz only had 2 1 Marines. And you guys might say that 1 armor isn't a big deal, but in Marine versus Marine combat, it's pretty massive, just because Marines only do 1 more damage with upgrades. And so we're obviously going to include this replay for you guys to view. But anyway, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave it in the section below. Otherwise, my name is Dusk, and I'll see you guys later.